these women put so much heart in these books. And that's why we are there. We are there to support them and never forget that. I try to remember always, it's not about me. It's not about, how I want food to look. It's not about what my vision is. I mean, it comes into play. And of course, we are the experts in visuals. So there were times when, we discussed and I said, could we plate this in a different way, or could we show this in a different way? Because I feel this might not show it off to its best qualities or stuff like that, for sure. But at the end of the day, the vision of the author is super important, and that's what we're there to support.
This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. Today's episode is a very special episode, and I think it's because of two reasons. The first reason is that we are going to cover a topic that is extremely mystical, and not every food photographer is experienced enough to talk about this topic, which is why there is a second reason to why this episode is so special, and that is because I have my dear friend Diana, who's joining us today to talk all about shooting cookbooks. Everything from the beginning to the execution to the end to the after. We are going to dissect cookbook photo shoots to the utmost detail. And I think Diana is the perfect person to talk about it. She's an amazing photographer. She's a stylist. She's a content creator. She's based in the Greater Toronto area in Canada. She is so rich in her experience. She's worked with cookbook authors, national and international food brands. She's worked with bloggers. She's worked with marketing and PR agencies and restaurants. And she's created images for both print and digital media. She's a commercial and an editorial food photographer. She's also a photography educator. She leads workshops. She does courses on food photography and also food styling. And Diana writes her own food blog. She shares recipe. I mean, is there anything that she doesn't do? She has such diverse experience in food photography. She is so knowledgeable, so experienced, and her photography is downright beautiful. She's a dear, dear friend of mine. And I think she is going to leave you with so much knowledge about cookbook photo shoots that when you walk out of this conversation, you're going to be able to take up such projects like a boss. All right. So let's get started. Let's get Diana on. Are you ready or are you ready? Here we go. Hi, Diana, and welcome to My Food Lens podcast. I think I've known you for so many years now that it feels extra special to have my friend as a guest, to have you here. What a brilliant, talented photographer. Seriously, this episode is going to be so special because of the connection and the bond that we share. So welcome to My Food Lens podcast, Diana.
Thank you so much, Dyutama. I'm so happy to be here. Like you said, we've been friends for such a long time, so it's extra special for sure. So thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited to dive into our topic today. And yeah, let's see if we can help some people.
Of course. And oh my God, I mean, you know how big a fan of your work I am, right? So like whenever I look at your work, I'm like, oh, first of all, I can easily tell that's Diana. Second of all, whenever I look at it, I get this sense of like, it's so clean. it's got this sense of calmness and it's got this sophistication, this elegance. And I've known you like that for so many years. That's exactly how I see Diana. That's exactly what I associate with you. So I feel like your work is such a reflection of your personality. And that's why I want to ruffle it up. I want to shake things up because I want to loosen up Diana a little bit, before we start talking all about this serious topic of cookbooks. So, this is a fun podcast. We are educational, but we are so fun and you're fun. And so that's why I want to start with something like that. So why don't you tell us something fun or maybe something controversial or maybe something that we don't know about you?
Well, okay, let me try to find something. You're right in that I'm fun too, I like to think, but also definitely there's a very sort of serious side to me. So I think that's introverted, serious Diana is 70% Diana.
Yeah.
Something fun. I don't know. It's the first thing that pops to mind is I've held tons of jobs before I was a photographer. I was, believe it or not, librarian. That's serious
Ooh.
Diana. Data analyst, also serious Diana. I was a teacher. I was, yeah, medical librarian. I've held a lot of jobs. I don't know how fun is that. Is that fun?
It's definitely
And
interesting. Wow.
I
All right.
found
Mm-hmm.
I found photography, and that's when, yeah, that's when things clicked for me. So
So photography has
um
been your longest job, has it?
not my longest. Let me think. Actually, yes, now it has been my
Yes.
longest.
Woohoo! We win, we win,
Yeah.
we win.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
absolutely.
Maybe that's why you have this, calmness in yourself as well. It's as if you've seen the world. you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the calmness, I definitely, that's what speaks the most to me. And, in what you said, in that I like to bring that sort of easeful vibe to my photos as well, if
Hmm.
I can help it. So definitely it's part of my personality and the way I try to put that into my work as well. And it relates even to how I consume content as well. I feel like the quick cut reels that we see often nowadays, for example, are definitely not my cup of tea. I feel like I'm getting very sort of unsettled when I watch it. So I have to scroll away because it just messes with my zen.
Yeah, yeah. And we can tell that it's you. Your art is definitely your personality, and we can definitely tell. But I still remember, Diana, like I think you had just finished your cookbook shoot, or it was ongoing, or something like that. And I had asked you a question about it, and you had shared like it was not easy. It was a tough, tough shoot. But I also remember that even during that description, even while I was reading your words, there was a sense of, okay, it went that way, but you know what? There was still that sense of calmness. So let's get right into it. Tell us how that first cookbook shoot came about. How did you land that project in the first place?
So it was very unexpected to me as well. And just to give you a bit of a perspective, this was November 2019. So it was right before the pandemic hit. And me and the author, her name is Ruth Martam, we were following each other on social media. We were both sourdough bread enthusiasts, and that's how kind of we connected. We were admiring each other's sourdough bread. And we connected on Instagram that way. We were following each other, and I think we were commenting on the same,
Mm-hmm.
sourdough posts, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we connected with each other. And I feel like there was definitely, mutual respect for each other's work and what she was doing. She's an amazing baker, and one day in my DMs, I saw a message from her asking, "Hey, Diana, could I email you about a project?" And I thought, yeah, sure. I gave her my email and so on. So she emailed me and said, I am discussing a book deal with a publisher, and would you like to do the photography for the book? And I was so incredibly flattered and so excited. And I didn't know in that moment how to write it in a way that would not sound like, oh my gosh, where do I sign right this second?
Oh, wow. I mean,
Yeah,
connections are so strong. Our network is everything. And I know as much as people hate social media and, people, I mean, things have definitely changed, but I feel like it still has the power to connect people in a very, very close way. So this was fantastic. It came through a connection, it came through network. And
yeah,
so tell me, what was the next thing? So all right, so she's got this book deal, she's written to you, and you're like super excited. But this was also your first cookbook shoot, right? So I'm
yeah.
sure you were there. I'm sure you also weren't like, were you nervous? Were you nervous at all?
I was, yes, I was. And I just want to really highlight what you said previously, about the importance of network, having a network. And I think that's so important because this wasn't someone who I just randomly messaged and asked, oh, are you writing a cookbook or anything like that? We'd had like not a very close relationship, but we'd had a relationship that we had nurtured by responding to each other's posts, by interacting with each other's work. So, in that sense, then I think social media is important, not to randomly DM people necessarily, although I don't think that's bad, but or nothing like that. I have no judgment. I've probably done it myself, with brands, but it's so important to nurture a connection with people beyond just sending like a DM. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
coming back to your question, definitely I was nervous. And there's that sense of, I know we ask ourselves this question a lot. Am I good enough? Am I going to manage to do this? Is my work good enough to be in a cookbook? So definitely I had those questions in my mind. But as with many things, that sense of calmness that you mentioned comes from hearing my inner critic and just trying to move forward anyway and being, well, I want to try.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Let's see if I can manage it or not. So just going forward and, to keep walking and try despite the doubts that you might have. I've never found that there was a challenge that I couldn't rise to. And I know that we are all the same in that way. When we will be presented with a challenge, it's a scary thought, but we will rise to it. And one way or another, we will go through. So,
Yeah, and we just have to have the faith that it will be fine. No matter
yes,
how,
absolutely.
it's like when you have to speak on stage. Just before you get in front of the mic, you're like shaking, you're nervous. And the moment you start to speak, it's just all fine. So I feel like it's kind of like that. But that's amazing. I mean, it's not easy to get over. Not everyone can, not everyone can get over that. Sometimes self doubt gets the better of us. But so proud of you. Like, whoa, you were like, come on, man, let's do this. Also, because you were excited. This is a new opportunity. It was something that you had really wanted. And I feel like having our photos in print or seeing them physically in front of us in a very tangible way, you can touch and feel, that has a very special place. And I think that's why cookbooks are so, so dear to us. These projects are so dear to us. So tell me, so this came to you, you were nervous, but you fought it. And then you guys start discussing the project details. So did you get on a discovery? Like, did you have a call? Did you have a pre-production call? And what were some of like the key questions that you were asking so that you could really deliver this project?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did not have just one call. We had many calls because it's a large project. And the same as with other client shoots, we want to make sure that we're asking all the questions ahead of time. So it was the same on my first cookbook that I shot. And for the second author that I worked with, we've had even more touch points to make sure that I'm understanding correctly not just the scope of the project, but also the vision of the author for the book.
Yeah.
So
And
yes, many calls to be had.
yeah, that's amazing. So you've done two cookbooks, and were they kind of similar? Were they different in terms of like the whole experience? If you had to just compare the experience of shooting a cookbook, would you say they were quite similar or they were quite different?
For me, they were similar from the perspective of the photography because we worked in kind of the same way with both my authors. The way that we structured the whole project was very similar. So we decided, the authors actually decided that we were going to work on this project kind of spaced out, so staggered out as they were working on the recipes. I was going to do the photography over time rather than as it sometimes happens, the author has their 60 or 80 recipes or whatever, and then it's a 1 week sort of sprint rather, where everything happens really quickly and the photography is done like all in one kind of.
I don't know why I recalled, but I thought that's how your first cookbook shoot was. You were shooting back to back to back, and it was like a very fast and furious project. Am I no? Am I mistaken?
Yeah, no, maybe it might have looked like that, maybe on social. I don't know, but we worked on it definitely for a long while.
Hmm.
It was we thought initially that we were going to be able to shoot it in that way, where I was going to be able to go to Ruth's home and shoot there the
Hmm.
like however many recipes she was going to be able to make for
Yes, I
the day.
remember this part. Yes. Hmm.
Yeah. And then what happened was the pandemic hit. And because of that, we weren't able to meet anymore. So all of
Hmm.
a sudden, the project became something very different where instead of meeting up and shooting and working together, we were each working in our own little world, sort of. And the great benefit was that we live fairly close. So she would come and drop off baked goods at my door. I
Yeah.
would pick them up and bring them inside, and then we would have calls, I think, each week as touch points to make
Right.
sure that I did the styling as well. So I was doing the styling and the photography, and I was making sure in the calls that I'm kind of following Ruth's
Hmm.
um, vision for the cookbook as well. And the same time around too with Punita, although the second time around, luckily, we were able to meet, we were able to
Yeah.
work together very closely, and it was even more amazing. So that's what I'm missing from my first cookbook, that
Hmm.
sort of bond with Ruth.
Right. So I'm going to go back a little bit on the discovery call part. So, especially for your first project, because by the second project, you're kind of seasoned already, you know. So in the first
Yes.
one, you're like, okay, what do I need to really ask her? What would be maybe your top 3 or 5 questions, that you think one must ask when you're starting a cookbook project?
So I think it's really, really important to ask the vision of the author for the book, first of all. So that would be my first kind of question, would be the author's vision for the book. What do they see it as, and how do they see the shoot happening? Is it going to happen in their home? Is it going to happen at another location? Do they want you to shoot it in your own studio? Do they want you to rent a large studio, maybe where you can accommodate a team of people? So how do they see the shoot or the shoots for the book happening? Besides the location, what is the deadline? What is the timeline that they see as necessary for the delivery of the images? And do they work with someone in terms of, having an assistant for cooking? So do they have a food stylist in mind, or do they want you as the photographer to do the styling? So that is, again, super important. Who will do the cooking? It's
Yes.
important to know whether you will be responsible for that or not. And yeah, who will be on set basically on
Hmm.
any given shoot day. And of course, it's important to consider the budget as well. if this is something that is a non-negotiable for you. And I mean, if we have a business,
Right, of
it needs to
course.
be. So yeah, I think those would be my
Mhm.
top pieces
Yeah.
of information that I try to get
Yeah,
in
and
a
in the
discovery call.
first, and especially in the first call, and then obviously you layer it up with more detailed information. So basically, the vision, the process, the team, and the
Yeah, the scope of the
the scope.
project, the number of
Mhm.
recipes, so definitely deadlines, that sort of thing.
Right.
So all the besides
Budget.
the
Mm-hmm.
larger vision, yes, exactly. So
Mm-hmm.
besides the larger vision for the book, which the author may or may not even have at the moment of that discovery call,
Yeah.
but also all this nitty-gritty. Like I feel like they will know for sure where they might want to shoot it. Like, do you want the photos to be happening in your home, or like how do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the author might not have like all the answers either, since it's a discovery call and they're trying to have you bring some input as well and some help into how this process could be going down. And
Absolutely.
my
Mm-hmm.
second author, Punita, we discussed this with her. She said, okay, how do you see the shoot happening? Like, what are my options for getting these photos for my book? And so I laid out the possible options and we discussed the best course of action. And in the end, it was the perfect decision for both of us and how we work. So it worked out amazing both times.
And yeah, and I always say that photographers have such a big role to play. We are just not there to press the shutter button or to, adjust our light. I mean, there is so much,
Absolutely.
whether it's a cookbook shoot, whether it's a restaurant photo shoot, whatever it is, we have so much potential to add, to bring to the table. We can get so many things, from a marketing standpoint, from a branding standpoint, from an art direction standpoint. There's so many avenues we can contribute to. So we should not hold back. So I love it. I love it that you had that conversation, And let's talk about art direction. I feel like that is something that gets a bit like it's so critical. And it's a
Mm.
tough one to kind of nail down, irrespective of which
Yeah.
project you're doing. Even for a restaurant, it's like sometimes a bit hard unless they've been doing it for 100 years. It can be a tough one, and especially cookbooks. The author might have a very strong vision, but sometimes the author may not have a vision at all. Like, they are just passionate about recipes and cooking, but to be able to visualize it in a way of a book and what the way the camera or the lens or the eye will see it is very different. So, what was your experience coming up with the art direction? Was that done by the author, or was that somewhere that you had to contribute as well?
I agree with you 100% in that art direction is definitely something that we're called to do sometimes. And sometimes I think it's a mix of even like creative direction and art direction and project management. You know, like you were saying previously, there's far more that we bring to the table at any given project than just pressing the shutter button or like even adjusting the lights. So definitely it was sort of collaborative. Both my authors had a pretty strong vision for what they wanted for their cookbooks, and I was so happy to be in service of that vision because ultimately that's what we want to do. So a big part of the sort of art direction portion of it is to have really great listening skills and hear them out. So both of these amazing women came to me, and for the first one, Ruth said, I want my the food to be very well lit, and so like there were definitely key things that she requested with regards to how her products were to appear in frame. And for the second one, Punita had a very strong vision. It's coming out next year, actually, her book. We worked very hard on it. And it's a book about sustainability as well. So
Mm-hmm.
cooking in a sustainable way. And she wanted that strongly reflected in everything that we did, how we styled, and the materials that we used in frame always. So my job then was to figure out how we could translate that into images. And, beyond the food, what other images, if any, we were going to include in the book. There was a lot of conversation about that as well. And they did have, again, so they did have a pretty strong vision. And I'm suggesting that the art direction part comes in where I'm sort of trying to translate that into the photo, right? So maybe we use a wooden backdrop. Maybe we go with softer fabrics since, this is a feminine shoot or something like that. So always trying to translate that into the styling and into the photo as well. Or if it's a dish that would be served for a gathering, then to reflect that in the styling or something like that. And we had a lot of conversations. So we had literally weekly touch points where we discussed the styling. We had mood boards that we discussed. I think having a mood board is so crucial because...
And who created the mood boards? Was that you did as the photographer? Were you in charge of that, or?
It was also collaborative in that I used an application where I created the framework sort of for the mood board, but the authors had the possibility to add their own inspiration images as well. And this worked really, really well with both of them because it was definitely something that helped a lot in the process.
And did you have like set dates and, timelines? All right. So we can add images up until 2 weeks before the shoot. Like, did you have deadlines?
Yeah, absolutely. So no photographer, I think, likes a last minute change to the whole concept. So definitely we had conversations about this. We discussed what the expectations were. But because they were doing the cooking, especially for the second book, which is even like clear in my memory, it would have been hard for the author as well to last moment have to change something in the dish or something. So it just worked better for everyone involved if we didn't change anything last minute. And we would always have a few days before the call, whatever I felt comfortable with, and she felt comfortable as well. So a few days before the shoot, we would have the Zoom call where we discussed sort of the final details, the styling, everything for the recipes. And then everyone would be sort of on the same page with regards to how the shoot was going to go down. What were the recipes that we were going to shoot, roughly how we were going to style it. And this was helpful also because some of the shoots happened at her place. And because of that, I needed to pack props. We discussed what she had, what I had, and then I had to pack all of those up. So it was in the service of everyone to have these conversations definitely ahead of time and be prepared in that way.
Were you the all-in-one, the stylist and the photographer, or were you working with a team in any of these shoots?
I was doing the styling and the photography for both of these books.
All right. So when you did talk about the art direction and you were talking about the concepts, then you were obviously discussing color palette and props and backdrops.
Yes.
And so was that something additional or something you had to procure, or was that usually like within your collection or their collection?
For the first cookbook, it was everything was within my collection. So I already had everything. Ruth's is a baking cookbook. It's called Bake to Order. And, since I'm a baker myself, it was not hard to bring anything. I had in my collection the things that were needed for the shoot for the most part. With Punita, we had a meeting before she came to the studio when we decided that we were going to work together, and she collected some props that had a lot of meaning for her. Some were family heirlooms, some were items that she had brought here to Canada from India, and she was very attached emotionally, and she wanted those items to be in the frame or in the book in some way. And so we discussed, she showed them to me, she packed them up, she brought them to the studio, and she said, here they are. Let's see how you can integrate these into the frame. So then when I was doing the shoots, I would always look through her collection of props first to make sure that if there was something that I could pull in and it was appropriate, then I would do that. And so I think we managed to bring in a little bit of the colors and the items that Punita had in mind for her book. So,
oh, amazing. And were you cooking at any point? Were you cooking? Because I kind of also have a memory that you were. Weren't you for the first one? Tell me, say yes.
for the I did some things.
Yes.
I can, one thing that I remember for sure is that I would always ask Ruth that if there were any garnishes. For example, something that is clear in my memory is a beautiful Earl Grey bundt cake that she made. And we wanted for it to have a white, a bit runny glaze on top of it. And it looks so pretty with the glaze. And I asked her to not glaze it at all. I was going to do that myself. So
Right.
sometimes if she thought it was a more obscure ingredient that I wouldn't have, then she would pack a little packet of that as well for me.
Yes.
But garnishes, that's how I work with bloggers that I work with who live close to me. I work with a friend and I always say, don't put on the garnishes.
Yes.
So if I'm
Yes.
doing styling, then it's okay for them to, bake the item if that is what their preference is. So I did some of the cooking for
Yeah.
sure, for some of the baking, I should say, for the first one. And for the second one as well.
Mm.
There were definitely items that I made in my home.
Ah, all right. Yeah, I kind
The
of do the
studio.
same. So I know you're saying this the garnish, but I do the same. So I shoot regularly for an ice cream brand, and many times they drop it off at home, and we are literally creating the toppings and things like that, just before the shoot. So everything, the rose petals have to be fresh and everything. So everything goes in last minute, and that's how they package it and they send it so that we're just doing all the last minute touches. So it sounds very similar, but
Yeah.
but tell me one thing, like Diana, like not everybody is a baker, not every photographer is like a hotshot cook, they and not all photographers love to cook. That's the other thing as well. So how essential is this skill? I mean, it's not, it really depends on a case to case basis, or you think some cooking skills would come in handy?
I definitely think that it's super helpful if you know how to cook because to cook and bake because you have some basic information about not just what the recipe looks like when you're talking to the client, but you also kind of know how to get there if something happens in the process. You know maybe how to rescue it or something like that. So
Yeah.
I think it's super helpful if as a photographer you have the ability to cook. That
Hmm.
said, there are tons of food photographers who I'm sure don't know how to cook and style, but they have the ability to hire out. So if you don't know, my advice would be
Hmm.
if you as a photographer are not a very accomplished cook or you're not confident that your cooking skills would be up to the level required for that particular shoot, then I would suggest hire it out. Just bring a styling assistant or a cook to help you out with that part of the process. And this is something that I've done as well. I'm an accomplished baker and there's many things that I love and know how to cook. On the other hand, there's definitely certain things which I'm less confident with. So for example, for a shoot that I did for another client. I brought in someone who was very good with grilling because that isn't
Mm-hmm.
something that is very much in my wheelhouse. So I'm not a master of
Wow.
the barbecue.
Right.
So because of that, I didn't feel confident to handle that part of the cooking. So I just brought someone in and it was amazing. It worked out brilliantly that way. She cooked amazing. She grilled amazing dishes for the shoot. And
Yeah.
it was so much more relaxing on that day that I didn't have the stress about, oh my God, am I going to manage to grill these things to perfection?
Wow. So, yeah, my advice to everyone listening is like either know someone who knows how to do the job or you or you train yourself
Absolutely.
because it's it's actually amazing that you have access to people who are specialized in certain foods or stylists who exist. There are so many people who live in remote towns. There are so many places that you don't have good stylists.
Mm.
And so
That-
people don't have access to them.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But again, I want to stress the importance of network because the
Ah.
person who I hired
Mhm.
out, she is someone I knew. It was a blogger friend who she's a cooking blogger. And I knew for a fact that she was really good with barbecue. So I just asked her. So, and I did the styling, I kind of did it myself where I kind of had for her instructions on how to, like, can you please arrange
Mhm.
the shrimp in this way on the skewers and let's have longer skewers with this many shrimp on it. So we kind of discussed the styling, but I knew that as far as the cooking
Yeah.
went, she definitely was very skilled with that part. So I left that to her. So
Mm.
with a bit of styling direction,
Yes.
teamwork makes the dream work.
Yes.
And
Amazing.
she did amazing, and the food looked fantastic at the end of the day. So
Oh, wow. So there's so many moving parts to this, right? I mean, as a photographer, we are not just limited to, again, just the camera. We're styling, we're thinking of the visuals, we are thinking of mood boards. There's so much that goes in the pre and in during the execution and even after. So when you are pricing, you've done your call, you've got the project scope, things are already hashed out. At what point you're like, okay, now I feel like I'm in a really good place to suggest or to come up with a quote for this project? And at what point do you come up with that, and what would be your key things to consider before you put a number to it?
So I think it's definitely good to do it at the beginning of the process after that first discovery call, just maybe a few more emails back and forth just to make sure that you really understand the scope of the project. Because I know that we photographers sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can ask all these questions in the beginning. And when I was at the beginning of my career, I too was nervous about asking all these questions. Like I was afraid that I would spook the
Yeah.
the leads if I asked all the questions. But I've since learned to understand that it actually is a sign of professional maturity rather and professionalism if you know what questions to ask to begin with, and rather than
Absolutely.
throw out the price, you make an effort to listen to what the client actually needs. So that's how I think about it now,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so helpful. I never have any qualms about asking the questions up front because I
Yes.
tell them I need to understand what your needs are so I don't charge you for things you don't really need. Um,
I like
and
that.
then,
I like that angle so that I don't charge you for things you don't need. That is such a great way to put it. Oftentimes the client, they want the price, they want even a tentative quote. They just want it upfront. They're like, what are your rates? What are your rates? And it never works like that. And I love this angle that someone can just put it out so politely saying, I need to ask you these questions so that I don't charge you for something you don't need. I think that is brilliant. All right. Yes. Next.
Yeah. So just asking those questions upfront, super important. And to understand the number of images that you will be shooting. And for cookbooks, for both of the cookbooks, actually, I told the authors, and that's just my personal sort of approach to it. I said, you know, a few images here and there. So we didn't agree on an exact number, like 65 images on the dot. Since this is a large project, I said, you don't need to worry if we're shooting 68 images instead of 62 or whatever, as long as we're in that ballpark and we're not shooting like a quarter more
True,
than
true.
what we've agreed on. I'm not part of the calm comes from not being overly stressed out about things when they don't exactly line up. And if I quoted for 65 images and for a large project, so that's what we're talking about.
Yes, yes.
So if we shot 70 and I quoted for 65, then I don't overly sweat it because I always think these things sort of come back around. So I'm, I want to bring that generosity as well, where I'm not super persnickety that, oh, we agreed about 65. Therefore, even if I love the other three images, I'm not going to give them to you because we agreed for 65 or anything like that. So a little bit of generosity goes a long way in business, I found.
I also feel it
And
adds to client experience, you know,
100%,
because
100%.
cookbooks are personal. And especially when you are not, working with an agency, or you're working with people whose heart is in that cookbook. You're creating a
Absolutely.
piece of their heart. And then you tell them, I cannot give you one extra photo. That's not
Yeah.
something that's within, that's heartbreaking. So I
Yeah.
agree that, when this is, you kind of have to be in your client's team. You're pitching for them. You're rooting for them. You are always,
100%.
about them. It's their experience. So
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I love that. You definitely have your boundaries, but you are not inflexible. You're not rigid. You're adding this, so that the next time they have a project, they know exactly where to come to.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it happened. Actually, I just had another shoot with Punita, the second author that I worked with, and we worked together so well. And that is, I think, part of it because I never
Mm-hmm.
was, when something came up for her or she had like an illness in the family, like her kid got sick or my kid got sick, we always had that understanding. So, of course, always with boundaries, it's not about letting yourself be, at the mercy of your client's circumstances. It's not about that at all. Having strong boundaries is important, but also understanding that we are humans, understanding that other people will make mistakes as well. Other
Mm-hmm.
people will, and ourselves too. So there were, as hard as you try, you will not maybe always deliver 100%. So having that generosity of spirit for your client and for
Mm-hmm.
yourself as well. And you're absolutely right, Judima, in that this is their brain baby. And both of the authors, these women put so much heart in these books, and that's why we are there. We are there to support them and never forget that. I try to remember always, it's not about me. It's not about, how I want food to look. It's not about what my vision is. I mean, it comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we are the experts in visuals. So there were times when, we discussed and I said, could we plate this in a different way, or could we show this in a different way? Because I feel this might not show it off to its best qualities or stuff like that for sure. But at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, the vision of the author is super important, and that's what we're there to support. So
yes.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm sure they appreciate it. They appreciate your input. They do want to hear the expert. It's not just about following, whatever they've said. They do want to have your perspective. So tell me, Diana, how would you it's so complicated. I feel like, pricing a cookbook is somewhat complicated. There's so many things to think about. Do you just look at the number of recipes? Do you look at the number of photos? Do you look at the days of shoot? Do you look at hours? I don't know. Do you look at the publisher? Do you look at, what are the considerations? So tell us a little bit about that. So that was Diana. And weren't you just loving the conversation? I find that it's such a real peek into the world of photographing a cookbook. That's, just the importance of network and connections and how these cookbook projects can come together in front of us, or whether we need to be food stylists and whether we need to have cooking skills. And if we don't have, then where can we go and find people and partner with them to be able to do these cookbook shoots? I mean, really, what are the skills that are needed to be able to take a cookbook photography project up, right? And how do we put a quote together for it? I mean, what are the things that we should really be asking our clients? So much good information in this part 1 of our photographing a cookbook with Diana. So we'll be back with part 2, and part 2 will be a lot about pricing and quotations and curveballs. What are the curveballs and contingencies, in shooting a cookbook? We're also going to talk about what it takes to shoot your own cookbook and where do we find such clients, publishing houses, all the good stuff is coming up in part 2. I hope you enjoyed part 1. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. You can email me at hello@myfoodlens.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at Ditama_myfoodlens. All right, I'll see you next week with another episode. Until then, bye-bye.